and then you just say, okay, perfect. Thanks, Holly. All right. So, yes, I am Adrienne Bush. I serve as the executive director of HHCK, the Homeless and Housing Coalition of Kentucky. I have had the privilege of being in this position for 8, almost 9 years. And so it is always a good time of year when we bring on Homes for All members, and when we get a chance to connect virtually, at least. So, with that, today we'll be talking about all things housing, especially through the lens of how low income, extremely low income, poor and working class Kentuckians are faring in our current housing environment. So, with that, we can move to the next slide. Okay, so a little bit about HHCK and Homes for All, this organization that you've committed to serving with over the next year. We're a statewide nonpartisan advocacy organization, policy organization with a unique perspective on administering housing assistance to people experiencing homelessness. Our mission is to eliminate the threat of homelessness and fulfill the promise of affordable housing. We also convene and staff the Kentucky Interagency Council on Homelessness. This is the statewide homeless policy and planning body that's authorized by Kentucky statute or Kentucky law. Basically, we strive to ensure that every Kentuckian has a place to call home. Next slide. Okay, a little bit of level setting for all of us. Lots of times when I'm talking to groups across the state, particularly people working in other areas, the question that comes up is why is housing so hard? Why is it so hard to get people the housing that they need, get them signed up for public housing, get them, the resources that they need to thrive? And it comes down to this. Nationally, across the United States, 1 in 4 families, only 1 in 4 families who qualify for housing assistance actually get it. And this is because of the way our federal government, we fund housing assistance across the board. Um, so rental assistance, but also the housing supply um, environment as a whole ends up being a little bit like a game of musical chairs. So who's played musical chairs? Like everybody, right? So we get this reference. And the idea is that you have, say, 10 chairs or 10 houses, if you will. Um, but say you have 15 people who are playing. Right off the bat, people who are trying to find a chair or a house may lose out, right? And it may be the folks who are trying to escape a domestic violence situation. Maybe someone with a past criminal background due to addiction. It may be someone with an eviction record. Maybe someone who just is working hard but isn't getting paid very well for it. And so they try to get a chair or house, but there are not enough chairs to go around. And so you may ask them, like, well, why? Why didn't you get a chair? And they may say, well, because I stepped funny on my knee last week and I'm moving very slowly because of it, because I've got this awkward knee brace. And that's true, but it's not the complete picture. The complete picture is that there were never enough chairs or houses to go around in the first place. Does that make sense to people? I'm going to assume it does. All right, next slide. So how did we get here? Basically, we have a housing shortage that is estimated across the United States to be between 4 and 7 million units. Units can be apartments, can be mobile homes, can be single family homes. But bottom line is we are short the amount of housing that we need for everybody to be adequately housed um, at the cost that aligns with their income. So then what happens when you have a shortage of something? Well, let's ask those of us who are around for the great toilet paper shortage in March of 2020. The price goes up, right? And so you see rapid and steep increases in rents with very little notice. And you also see the price of just the listing prices of houses go up, as well as interest rates have also gone up. And those are set by the Federal Reserve. So the cost to borrow money is also more expensive. Then we have complicating factors, barriers, such as some of the ones I just mentioned. Could be a behavioral health issue, whether it's severe mental illness or it's active addiction or even former addiction, recovering addiction. Um, it could be a number of things, but bottom line, they are complicating factors, not the cause of someone's housing insecurity. What we then end up seeing is increased housing insecurity at the household level, which can show up in ways like evictions or living in one's car, staying on the riverbank, entering a shelter, being stuck in housing where the rent is just too much, but you really can't find another place to live. And it hurts people at the individual level, but it also hurts at the community level. Um, Communities lose quality of life in terms of people being able to thrive, um, people being able to work in the community where they want to live, children, showing up to school, not being displaced. It hurts all of us. Next slide. Okay, so in 2024, Kentucky Housing Corporation, which is our state housing finance agency, they receive a lot of the federal funds that come into Kentucky and then disperse them out to partners. They partnered with a group called Bowen National Research. They're located in Columbus, Ohio, so not too far away, to come up with a statewide housing supply gap study. And what they found was they looked at housing for extremely low income folks all the way up to what we would consider moderate income. So 151% of the area median income and above. And they looked at both the rental market and what we call the for sale market, the home ownership market. I think the important thing for you to note as Homes for All member participating with HHCK is that while we need housing across the board in all areas, um, we definitely see the biggest driver of this deficit being rental and home ownership needs for extremely low income folks, people who are zero income to 30% of the area median income. So, not making a whole lot of money. Next slide. Okay, so by 2029, this study projected out what we could see this supply deficit grow to if we do nothing but if nothing material changes and none of our conditions change. And so you see this deficit grow to 287,120 homes. Again, the biggest drivers are going to be um, in the housing that is needed for extremely low income folks. Bigger on the rental side, still needed on the for sale homeownership side too. Next slide. The other interesting thing about the study is that they tried to drill it down. These numbers actually come from the county by county numbers. And so sometimes I think the perception is that, well, we have a housing problem in Louisville, Lexington, maybe some cities in northern Kentucky, maybe Bowling Green, but everywhere else in the state, it's pretty affordable to live and everything's humming along. But this map shows that's not the case. We've got problems all over the place, right? Um, and sometimes in a smaller community, say Perry County, um, in the eastern part of the state, that's a little bit darker, and you do see like the deficit there relative to the population. Like the shortage has a pretty big impact. Some of the other counties that stick out to me are the counties, well, in central Kentucky. I happen to live in Franklin County, and so some of the darker counties around Lexington, they're experiencing high growth, and their rents are definitely going up, and they are definitely experiencing a shortage. Next slide. Okay, so this is just in case you thought I was just giving you hot takes without evidence. Um, these are some news citations, some studies around rising housing costs over the past few years and the pressure that Kentuckians are feeling, and other Americans are feeling in other states across the board. Next slide. Okay, so let's talk about rent specifically. And there's a reason why we do this. One is that the shortage really does drive rent up across the board. And it results in 1 in 4 Kentuckians paying more than 30% of their income towards housing. Let me step back a minute and say that the general agreed upon policy in the United States, which has been the case for, gosh, probably 60 years now, is that no one should be paying more than 30% of their adjusted gross monthly income towards their housing costs, whether it's a rent, whether it's mortgage, etc. Um, so anyone who is paying more than 30% is considered cost burdened, and it creates pressures in other ways. Food becomes harder to afford, um, gas, utilities, all of that. Um, 2 out of 3 extremely low income renters are actually paying more than half of their income towards their rent, which is not sustainable at all. These rents, when you have an across the board rent increase, the Government Accountability Office in Washington, D.C., has found that for every $100 median rent increase in a community, there is a 9% increase in the rate of homelessness also in that community. And then I picked out Madison County just because that happens to be where I was most recently. And you can see that the average wage to affordably rent a 2-bedroom home so that you're not above that 30% marker is 18.15 per hour. The graphics on the right come from the National Low Income Housing Coalition. They do a report annually called the Out of Reach Report, where they seek to quantify how much does it cost for people to comfortably live and pay rent. They are very focused on the situation of renters. And what they have found is statewide in 2025, it actually costs, or it takes about 21.47 on average in the state to afford a 2-bedroom home. Some communities are higher, some are lower, but that's the statewide average. Next slide. All right. So this is just my way of trying to demonstrate in a visceral way. When we have unaffordable rents, it causes pressure both above and below, right? And it almost causes, not almost, it does cause this this vicious cycle where the folks who can least afford it, who are extremely low income, kind of come in and out of homelessness, kind of like a revolving door. They're the ones who have several evictions on their records. They've stayed with family. They've stayed in shelters. They've paid for motels on their own when they could. But they are just kind of bouncing from place to place. On the upper end of the income spectrum for those who are renting, so like I would say 80% area median income and above, those are the folks who right now are just being pushed out or locked out of the home ownership market. That's why I put home ownership in like 5 point size font, because it's becoming further and further out of reach for them, um, because of the tight inventory in the housing market. Prices keep going up, which means that a mortgage becomes structurally unaffordable and it's costing more money to borrow because of the interest rates. And so people are stuck in apartments that, they may be paying $1,500 a month. They could theoretically, if we had an adequate housing market, their mortgage payment could be lower. They also would be freeing up a rental unit for somebody who needs it. Next slide. All right, so a word on homelessness. Next slide. Okay, this is a snapshot of homelessness that is actually through 2025. I updated the graphics. I forgot to update the title. I apologize for that. Um, but you can see I did a brief analysis of what we call the point in time count, from 2013 all the way through 2025. The point in time count is done across the country. It is a requirement for communities who are receiving continuum of care funding. And so in Kentucky, our jurisdictions are divided into Louisville, Lexington, and the balance of state, which consists of the 118 counties that are not Fayette and Jefferson. So on the left-hand side of the slide, you can see that when we started counting using pretty much the same methodology in 2013, we were hovering just above 55,000, 5,500. And then steadily, as federal resources were targeted, particularly for veterans and people experiencing chronic homelessness, those numbers really declined year over year. Were people still experiencing homelessness? Yes. Were the trend lines going down? Also, yes. Um, and another note is that this count is only as good as the data going into it. It requires robust participation across the state, which we'll get to in a minute. So, but you see the numbers had pretty well declined by 29 through 2019, 2020. 2021 was a sheltered count only, so they really took a dip then. But ever since then, they have been steadily increasing, and they're not just increasing in Lexington and Louisville, they are increasing across the board. And on the right, on the pie chart, you can see that of the people who were counted, which it was 5,789 in 2025, over half of them are in our neck of the woods. I say our neck of the woods just because, again, I live in Frankfort, um, are in the balance of state. Next slide. Okay, so this is a note here. This was from an article that was done by some researchers who were at the University of Kentucky at the time, and then one of them moved on to different places. But they did a study of homeless service providers and unsheltered homelessness over a 6 year period ending in 2021 that basically shows that A, we have some serious service deserts in Kentucky, which I'm sure everyone on this call can attest to. But it also shows that when we target homeless service providers to the populations who are experiencing homelessness in our counties, we should see a decrease of homelessness where we have increased the resources. It's not a one for one, but you definitely see it in communities like Lexington during that time frame as they increased their resources for the populations who were experiencing homelessness. Their numbers were declining during those years. Next slide. Okay, so I want to share with you some federal resources for homelessness. As I said before, there is a program and a governance structure called the Continuum of Care. So they have programs and funding. Um, in the balance of state, it comes to Kentucky Housing Corporation, and then they fund different providers. Some of you are at those service sites, some of you are at non-federally funded ones. But we also have Emergency Solutions Grant um, programming coming to the state. We also have some special purpose vouchers, housing vouchers that are called, they're under different titles. You may hear mainstream or housing stability, and there might be other resources depending on your service site. For Louisville folks, your number one resource is the Coalition for the Homeless. And then in Lexington, um, and I know we've got some Lexington folks on this call. The Continuum of Care grantee is the Office of Homelessness Prevention and Intervention. Um, but we also, where you're serving at Community Action Council, you all are a partner with them quite a bit. So everywhere else, it varies. The balance of state has divided into 15 regions that basically they overlap the area development district footprints. And so there is a lead agency who can take people who are literally experiencing homelessness in a shelter or on the street, and get them at least prioritized for what's called coordinated entry. Next slide. All right. So moving on to rental, I just want to do a little deeper dive into the out of reach report with you all. Um, what we see, as I said before, we have crossed the $20 figure when it comes to the state housing wage. When I started this job in 2017, I think it was like at $13 an hour. So that's quite a big jump. We were also number 50. We were one of the most affordable states. Um, but as you can see, we are moving up, moving down, depending on what your perspective is. But basically, we were getting more unaffordable, which probably resonates with what you all are feeling in your communities. Some of our most expensive areas are, not surprisingly, Louisville, Cincinnati. There is a part of Western Kentucky that is close to Clarksville, Tennessee, that kind of gets lumped in to that area. The Bowling Green area, and of course, the Lexington, Fayette County, and the surrounding counties there. Some of these numbers on the right-hand side talk about how many hours you would have to work at minimum wage. Thankfully, with upward pressure on wages to some extent in some communities and some industries, um, it hopefully folks are making more than minimum wage, but still they may not be working and they may not be getting anywhere close to that 21.47 per hour. Next slide. Um, Before I move on to this one, you can look up your community, your county, if you are interested in looking at the out of reach numbers. All the hyperlinks in this slide deck, which will go out to you, are live. So, okay. Also under the rental category, I want to talk about public housing because public housing is what has been our safety net, um, our theoretical safety net since it was created last century. It was established to provide decent and safe rental housing for eligible low-income families, the elderly, and persons with disabilities. And so a lot of programs have risen in response to needs that were not being met by public housing. But a lot of that gets back to how we fund it and the fact that only 1 in 4 families who would otherwise get it actually does. So I want to be clear, in Kentucky, according to the Urban Institute, about 150,000 individuals are currently receiving public housing assistance. So they're living in a housing authority unit, or they might be renting on the private market with a voucher. If you ever are interested in learning more about housing authorities in Kentucky, we have between 100 and 150. If you want to click on that link, you can click on Kentucky and you can see all the counties that have local housing authorities. And you can also see that in some of our housing authorities, some of our smaller housing authorities may not operate a voucher program. Those counties are covered by Kentucky Housing Corporation. It's 87 out of 120. Next slide. So what funds rental development or assistance? Primarily at the federal level, it's the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program. It was created in 1986 as part of a tax overhaul package back then. And since that time, that's where the bulk of affordable housing development, multifamily development has come from. There's also a program called the Home Investment Partnerships Program that was created in the 1990s. And then at the state level, we have what we call gap financing. So we have the Affordable Housing Trust Fund can play this role. The recently created Rural Housing Trust Fund can also provide gap financing for multifamily development, as well as local housing trust funds. So Lexington has one, Louisville has one, and I believe the city of Bowling Green has started one as well. In terms of rental assistance, what funds it is what we call housing choice vouchers through the public housing authorities or continuum of care program. So AmeriCorps members placed at service sites may become familiar with rental assistance programs to help low-income households bridge the gap between income and housing costs or help people exit homelessness. Next slide. All right. We are on to home ownership. Next slide. All right. Aging housing stock. Let's talk about it. Our housing is really old in Kentucky, mostly because our new building permits, our new building, it hasn't kept pace with the amount of housing that we need statewide. So that in part explains our housing shortage at the beginning of the slide deck, but also tells us why our housing is older relative to maybe some other states. And when that happens, we see like 1 in 4 units may have some combination of incomplete plumbing, kitchen facilities, overcrowding, or they're too expensive, cost burden. And what you may find is that when folks are placed into a voucher program, it may take a minute before you find a unit, that will accept, where the landlord will accept the voucher and the tenant, but also where their property will meet a housing quality standard inspection or an NSPIRE inspection. Next slide. All right, so some of the programs that are used to help make home ownership more affordable for people whom that's what they want and they are stable and that makes sense for them. Again, the Home Investment Partnerships Program, I mentioned it can be used for rental development, but it has been used very well in Kentucky for for single family home ownership development. Also, in some of our rural communities, USDA Rural Development has some housing programs, both new home buyer programs as well as home repair. Community Development Block Grant funding comes from HUD, or Housing and Urban Development. It can be used for housing development. And then, like rental, we have our state affordable housing trust fund and rural housing trust fund that has been used to for home ownership, home buyer, first time home buyers in particular. And then some of your sites may use Federal Home Loan Bank for new home ownership development as well as home repairs. And then there might be some other programs that your site is using. So all of these are used by nonprofit home ownership and home repair orgs, and your service as AmeriCorps members really helps deploy, stretch these resources in your community. Next slide. So I want to take a minute for all of us to think about how do I contribute through Homes for All. On the supply side, we have our construction assistant. You all are helping directly increase the supply of new homes and increasing the affordable home ownership rate. On the housing counseling side, you're empowering households to become homeowners, get the repairs that they need, again, increasing the affordable home ownership rate. On the homeless services side of things, you're helping reduce the number of unsheltered and sheltered people experiencing homelessness. And I'm not sure if we have any capacity building members this year, but if we don't, that's okay. But we do. Perfect. Think of it as you are increasing the ability of your community to reduce homelessness and housing instability, make sure rental homes are affordable to individuals, and expanding home ownership opportunities for households. You are helping build that infrastructure to make housing development and housing affordability a priority in your community. Next slide. Okay, a couple of brief policy updates. I want to talk about federal appropriations. On the left-hand side, you will see the share of federal spending by budget category. And the reason I want to bring this up is because you may be able to see, but you may need new glasses. There is I need new glasses. The teal triangle pie wedge at the bottom that says 1 and 14%. That is non-defense discretionary funding. That is where housing assistance programs, housing development programming funds come from. Unfortunately, it's not all of the 14%. Anytime there is some sort of grant opportunity for states or nonprofits in any area, whether it's education, healthcare, transportation, it is all coming out of that 14% sliver. And it is the duty and the authority of Congress. Oh gosh. Okay. It is the duty and authority of Congress to appropriate these funds every single year. So every year, the White House puts together what is called a skinny budget and a full budget proposal. And so it is just their suggestion based on being the executive branch. This is how we think you all should appropriate the money. This year, we saw from the current administration proposals to eliminate critical federal grants, including the Home Investment Partnerships Program. That's a program, as I said, that creates and preserves affordable homes. There were also proposals to block grant and cut rental assistance by 43% and limit the time someone could be on it to 2 years. Their proposal also included eliminating the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, or LIHEAP, which prevents utility disconnection, as well as cutting fair housing funding, and block granting and cutting homeless assistance and limiting participation to 2 years. Now, again, the Congress is actually responsible for appropriating the money, and telling the White House how to spend it. And so the House's proposal, the House of Representatives proposal, um, again sought to eliminate critical federal grants, including the Home Investment Partnerships Program, and it would level fund rental assistance and homeless assistance, which basically acts as a cut. Because if rents keep going up, the amount landlords can charge, then you can basically serve fewer people with it. Next slide. All right. Now, on the Senate side, they propose to level fund the home program. Um, and then they proposed a modest increase for rental assistance and homeless assistance. Not enough to keep everybody who's currently on the programming, but a modest increase from last year's funding. Also with LIHEAP, same deal, modest increase. So what happens next? The federal fiscal year begins October 1st. So Congress doesn't have a lot of time to get this budget, this appropriations process done. And the numbers between the House and Senate, plus the programs, are different. So there has to be reconciliation between the two versions, plus it needs the president's signature. Alternatively, they can do what's called a continuing resolution for a month, a week, a couple months, a year. It's up to them. And so now the latest that we have heard is that they are discussing doing a continuing resolution for a couple of months. Some of the other proposals that might come out of future appropriations processes include like increased rents for people receiving public housing assistance, and work reporting requirements as well. Next slide. All right. The next thing is not a law, it's not appropriations, but it is an executive order that was published by the White House at the end of July. And it calls for forced institutionalization of people suffering from addiction and mental illness who are sleeping outside. It also calls for requirements of federally funded programs to share personal and health-related data with law enforcement. And it also calls for programs receiving federally funded homeless assistance to put up additional requirements for treatment and supportive services as a condition of receiving housing assistance. So it does not have the it. An executive order is not, I mean, it has to be put into effect with the agencies that fall within the executive branch. So with this, we're kind of in a wait and see mode. And how does this play out in our communities across the United States and particularly in Kentucky? Next slide. All right. So at the state level, our state lawmakers have taken an interest in housing over the last year or two that I have not seen since I've been doing this work. And so last year, they created a housing task force to meet between June and November in between legislative sessions. And they realized that they had so much to learn and there was so much to cover that they needed to do it again. And so we have the Housing Task Force that has been reconvened for 2025. The folks listed on the right of the slide deck are on this Housing Task Force. And the legislators can use this to inform 2026 legislation. And if you're ever interested in just watching the meetings, they are on demand on the KET.org. website or the Legislative Research Commission has a YouTube channel. So you can watch it at 2 in the morning if you have some insomnia or something. Next slide. All right. So I want us to think at HHCK, we talk a lot about housing stability, and we think of it, the metaphor that comes to mind is a three-legged stool. So one of the legs is housing supply and affordability. Another leg is reducing barriers to housing. And a third leg is renter protections. Because again, those are the folks who are getting squeezed and kind of pushed out into homelessness or locked out of home ownership. Next slide. All right. So some of the housing solutions that we've seen across the board and brought forth by lawmakers in Kentucky are around modernizing and indexing the fee structure that funds our state affordable housing trust fund. That fee structure has been in place for since 2007. It is $6 on every real estate transaction, and it is only generating about $3 million annually, which is not enough to develop all of the housing that we need developed, right? So this would increase the fee and it would also index it so that it would grow over time without intervention from the state legislature. Another proposal is for the expungement of dismissed evictions, so evictions that never went through the full court process. That's about 40% of all evictions in Kentucky, as well as minors being improperly listed in a filing. Minors should never be listed because they cannot, by law, consent to being on a lease. And then lastly, allowing for religious institutions who want to develop affordable housing, it kind of streamlining one of the barriers, which can be planning and zoning requirements in some of our more developed areas. We feel like this is a good low-hanging fruit type of policy. It's been proposed at the congressional level that would help spur some much needed development across Kentucky. Next slide. All right. So take a couple of minutes, I'd say till 2:49, um, and reflect on how housing policies have helped or hurt you during your life. And you can write it down in your notebook if you have one, or you can make a note in Microsoft Word or Google Docs. And when we come back, if you want to share things that you found helpful or hurtful, um, I think it's good. Sometimes we think that our own housing situation, that we're the only ones facing it. Um, it's very individualized, it's very localized, but what I have found in years of doing this work is that we have more in common than what divides us. Holly, you can go to the next slide if you want. These are some prompting questions for you in case you like to read things as I do. Think about what barriers you may have faced. What are the most common housing issues that people in our community face? What are the most common solutions you've heard people ask for? And what's getting in the way of housing stability in your community? Okay, next slide. All right, reporting out. Is anyone brave and wants to come off mute and tell us what they've been thinking about? Or you can put it in the chat.
I'll unmute. Is it working?
It is.
So, I got into this position because when I was younger, we were low income. So I've been affected by that kind of thing my entire life. Um, a lot of the times when we were kids, it was the only way we had affordable housing. Um, but as an adult in my area, I'm in Paducah, Kentucky, which is Western Kentucky. And we've actually, we're a UNESCO World Heritage Site. We're an up and coming tourist destination, but that has pushed a lot of local people. I'm 41, people my age completely out of the housing market, like new homeowners, people who are just trying to save and get their lives going and buy a home. I mean, they're not able to do it. I thought about going into real estate 2 years ago, and honestly, what turned me away from it was how much the housing crisis was affecting people, like out of state buyers coming in, buying single occupancy family homes, turning them to Airbnbs. Um, so we've had a lot of issues with that. I actually spoke at my local city council meeting once a couple years ago about it, and just spoke up about I didn't think I'd be able to afford a house in this area, and a lot of people just still can't. And even just for renting, being able to save up enough money for deposits, if you have pets, pet deposits, like that's what I know a lot of people struggle with too. But yeah, to see the numbers of how much it costs on average to actually be able to afford a home is it's a familiar feeling. Like most people in my area, even though we have a stark juxtaposition of like a very wealthy class that's building here, and then
Mhm.
everybody else that's being
Yeah.
left behind in that. So that's my experience with it, and I'm excited to be a part of something that's trying to keep people in their apartments if they get behind a little bit. And hopefully, I have a friend who did Vista here a couple years ago, and she helped build and restore like people's homes, elderly folks whose homes are falling apart. Um, the Neighborhood Alliance helps repair them so they can stay in their housing. So, yeah, I'm excited to be here. It's affected me my whole life, so I'm glad to be a part of trying to make some good things happen.
Great. And thank you for being vulnerable and sharing with us. That was great. Okay, and I see we've got some entries in the chat as well. Lack of full-time employment as parent divorce led me to live in low-income housing, also needing to keep my son's school schedule. Appreciate income-based housing greatly, afraid of loss of housing based on 2-year limit. Yeah, 2 years flies by for sure. And right now, to be clear, that has just been a proposal from the administration, and Congress has not taken the administration up in its appropriations work. But it is really troubling. I think about people who are elderly and they are only supposed to be in public housing for 2 years. It doesn't seem to quite meet the intent of the program. Anybody else want to share out before we move on? All right, next slide. Oh,
Sorry, trying to find my mute.
go
I
for it.
I think so. I work at a domestic violence shelter. I was an employee there before I became AmeriCorps. After taking maternity leave. Anyways, a lot of issues that our girls face. I mean, they unfortunately a lot of times domestic violence situations they've self-medicated, and so a lot are in recovery or trying to get there. And then the majority of those girls as well don't have transportation because they're fleeing. They're in an emergency kind of crisis situation. Um, and so, um, being a domestic violence shelter, not in a big city, but in a more rural area, um, places are really spread out. So for them to get housing, they need to find a job, but they can't have a job if it's not on the bus route because we only have like we have very limited public transportation. To take a taxi is like $20 one way, and so it's like, it's taking multiple hours of their wages just to get to work sometimes. So I think that limits, we might know of some good affordable housing, but if it's not in the bus route, then we just might as well forget about it.
Mhm.
Because of lack of public transportation kind of complicates things. So
Yeah, I do think it's there have been efforts at the federal level in Congress. There's a bill that's been proposed the last couple of Congresses. It's called Build More Housing Near Transit Act, I think. But with that whole idea, like it doesn't make sense to further displace people um, where they cannot easily get to school and work and live in their communities. So, and at the same time, we are shelters. We cannot be everything to everyone. Um, so, but if we can figure out how to align some of our transportation policies as well as with our housing development, I think we would all be better off. All right. With that, I'll turn it briefly to question Q&A. And you can feel free to shoot me questions. My contact info is at the next slide. Um, if there's anything you have a burning question about, you can always get with Holly as well, just because I know that we are running up against the 3 o'clock hour, and Holly may have Homes for All program specific things that she needs to share with you. So with that, I'll turn it back to Holly.
Thank you. I'm gonna exit my screen, and I'm so sorry I sound so hoarse. I don't know what is going on with me right now. The weather's really, gosh, the weather's really getting me. Stop the recording.